Welcome back to The Right Space. This is the podcast for anyone really in the health and wellness industry who has published or is writing a book. It's been a really good start so far to our first season, and we've already had a good variety of author journeys on the show. Today, I'm going to be going against our own model slightly, as usually we only interview published authors, but today I'm chatting to Anneke, who is actually an unpublished wellness writer, soon to be author. And the reason I wanted to do this interview is because myself and Anneke have been talking about her upcoming memoir now for such a long time. And I think it's really, really important for listeners to understand the ins and outs, the work and the dedication that goes into writing a memoir rather than just the finished product. And I think Anneke is the perfect person to be able to give us that insight. I'm also hoping that this interview might provide comfort for anyone out there going through a similar journey to Anneke. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to also continue to follow Anneke's journey, a full kind of writing to publishing journey over 2 or 3 episodes, as she kind of documents what goes on in the process. So, as it stands, Anneke has just finished the first draft of her memoir, which I believe she's been working on since about January. And the memoir is of her experience of medical gaslighting while suffering a long-term chronic illness. Now, I think that's a topic that unfortunately might sound familiar for a lot of people out there. So let's start. Let's get the lowdown on Anneke's journey into the book world so far. Welcome, Anneke. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's such an honor when I hear you do the introduction and to actually realize that, I am the first person that you're interviewing who actually doesn't have anything to back herself up with other than just the fact that we've known each other pretty much since the start of my writing journey. I wasn't far into it when we happened upon each other on Facebook.
I think you're such a good person to speak to because we've kind of been on that journey together, haven't we?
Yeah.
Firstly, I really wanted to just ask you if you could just give a bit of background on your illness, as much or as little information that you're happy to give, your illness and your struggles that you've been through, which have led you to wanting to write a book.
The wanting to write a book has been there for a long time, but very much in the way that most people will say, I've got a book inside me, and I made some attempts at starting a few on different subjects and got as far as the first chapter kind of thing, But as far as my health journey itself is concerned, I was struggling already in childhood. There were a lot of markers in childhood that we recognize when looking back. But I have little issue with the fact that it was difficult to pick those things up and put them together into the image that came much, much later, which by then was a combination of chronic conditions, one of which we're sure I was born with because it's a genetic condition, which is called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. For short and for easy workings, EDS. There's several categories of that, and the one I have is the hypermobile type. Now, we refer to each other as medical zebras, and the reason for that is exactly what I was saying, that doctors are trained, when you hear hooves, when you put your ear to the ground and you hear hooves, think of horses, because the chances are so high that they're going to be horses that, why prepare for something else turning up? But that means that the rare conditions get missed, and especially when they're chronic, it's an issue because, somebody comes along and you try and treat them for what would suit a horse and they should get better. And then they kind of, it becomes that they refuse to get better no matter what I try thing, rather than we might have this wrong. Rare conditions, obviously, is it fair to expect every single doctor to know every single disease that has been discovered so far? I think not, so that's an issue. But 2 other things is its visibility, and this is something that I'm finding by contact with other people with a history of medical gaslighting, is that if you have a condition that is hard to see, like I'm here, I'm talking to you, you see me, I'm dressed, it looks like I'm managing. What am I complaining about?
Could you explain to the listeners a little bit about your day-to-day life, the kind of symptoms that you experience that, behind closed doors that maybe people would never expect you to be going through?
It's hard to do that because it does fluctuate so
Mm,
much. And that was the thing that I was going to combine with the lack of visibility of it, is also the fact that it fluctuates so much.
yeah.
So what I learned over the years, but I mean, I'm 52 now, and really I have learned this in the last 5 years, maybe, is to express it in terms of functional hours. So when I look back on really all of my adulthood, and I take an average of any block of, say, 6 months or so, I will always end up at about 4 to 5 functional hours a day.
Oh, wow.
The quality of what I can fill that with, that varies. At the moment, it's pretty reasonable. Like, for example, I was saying to you earlier, I've actually been to a doctor this morning in a hospital, and I've walked to the bus stop. I've taken the bus, I walked back, and then it was an issue because I had to walk uphill to come back
Mm,
home. And people will see me walking up that hill and they will assume, look, she can do it. And if you can do it now, you can do it anytime. Now, the thing to compare that with is, if you see a top athlete running a marathon, would you say to them the next day, well, I saw you doing it yesterday, so why aren't you able to do it today? It's yeah, that's what it is. I've gone to the edge of my ability. Of course, I can't do it tomorrow, you know.
yeah.
Um, and there's a lot of those kind of comparisons that I try to use to explain to people what it is like. But that's very, very difficult, because the other thing about only having 4 to 5 functional hours in a day is, in that time, to have a quality of life comparable to what would be expected of a woman my age and condition, in this part of the world. I have to fit that into 4 to 5 hours.
Yeah.
So
Um,
where does the priority lie? Does it go into because people imagine, so what do you do with the other hours? You lie in a hammock and read a book, or you do a bit of crochet, or, I do crochet, and I do make cards, I craft with paper. All those I have to do within those 4 to 5 hours. That's not my rest. That's activity.
yeah.
Everything that requires any kind of skill is activity. Talking like this is activity. So, what do I do? If I wish I could sleep and recuperate from the sleep, but I'm past those days. Now, there was a stage of my life where I had about 15 hours out of every 24 that I actually slept.
Wow.
And I have to say, my 4 to 5 functional hours were also lying down in bed, doing very, very little, but things like eating or getting up and going to the toilet. We even moved. I had a camper potty in the bedroom because I couldn't make it to the actual toilet. And
Yeah.
initially, it was at the end of the bed. I couldn't make it to there. We had to put it right next to me so that my husband could pick me up, turn me around, put me on it, and pick me back up again, turn me back to bed.
It's insane that that could even be a story on its own. Like your journey with chronic
In
illness,
itself.
that could actually be a story without then adding on
Yeah,
top of it the fact that there's medical gaslighting thrown in. And you mentioned about like the fluctuation of
exactly.
it. And I can, even from like really minor doctor's appointments that I've been to, the fact that you can't solidly sit there and say this happened and it's continued to happen, that's it. The fact that they can ask you a question like, how long has
Yeah,
your head been hurting for? And you say, well, actually it hurt like for 2 hours yesterday, and then it was fine for a week, and then I had a whole day of it. And imagine that your journey's been a little bit like that, where it's like, well, there's no solid answer I can give you. Like, it fluctuates, and the more you fluctuate and the more you and ah about an answer, you can see the less credible that you come across to the doctor. And they're
yeah,
thinking, Is there anything wrong with this
Exactly.
person? Like, there's no consistency. Can they be that sick?
And then if you add in what is very typical in Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, because it's a fault in the connective tissue, so it's your whole body. Your whole body is held together by connective tissue.
Yeah.
Every organ, So you'll go to the doctor and you'll say, I've got this headache that keeps recurring. But actually, at the moment, it's more my hip, and yesterday my knee was really bad. And, and you can, like you say, you could just see your credibility dwindling. you know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's understandable, but it isn't, because that is what we're faced with. And
Mm.
so to some extent, the medical gaslighting that came with it, the questioning of my credibility, the need for me to be able to justify every single symptom that I ever raised, is understandable. And the fact that it was misdiagnosed, because I was misdiagnosed as having chronic fatigue syndrome, or
Mm.
initially ME, myalgic encephalomyelitis, the two were the same condition. And there's been a lot of infighting in the medical world about what it should be called and how people should be seen and treated, in two large groups: the biomedical side, who actually do look at what is wrong with the body and how can we best support that, and then the psychosomatic side, who say, well, you're not going to search for anything in the body, are you? You're always going to find something. These people need their mind checking, and then these things are quotes. And so what initially for me started as real care for me, and for, if this is a psychological construct causing all that, I was happy to sign into that,
Mm.
because if it was such that I could change my psychological processes and heal myself by doing that, I was up for it. You know, just get those skeletons out of my cupboard. I will look them in the eye, and I did.
Yeah.
And it helped me a great deal to have a much stronger disposition mentally and emotionally, but I was just as ill. And it actually got to the stage where, when suggestions were made about me inventing symptoms or imagining them or exaggerating them, that I would say, does that make me any less ill? And then there was stumped, well, does that mean my right to care and to respect has to disappear?
Yeah. I
Because
know.
clearly
Yeah.
there's something wrong with me if I'm imagining this. So there was that shift, first from it being there to help me to it becoming a pointing the finger at me, and me needing to justify my symptoms. So then I started to realize that this isn't a personal thing. And I realized I read and heard about the infighting between doctors and in the medical world, and it all went to the press. And, there was a lot to do at one stage in the press about ME and CFS. And it really started then. Following that, in Belgium, there was, because I live in Belgium, I'm from Belgium originally, there was two doctors got really heavy fines because they did do more investigations with people who had that diagnosis, and they found things that were wrong with them. They prescribed medication which cost money,
Yeah.
and suddenly we were too expensive.
Oh,
And so what started as they're really wanting to take care of me grew gradually into, this is an international witch hunt.
it's crazy, isn't it? Just to think that that goes on, and you don't think about it as a relatively healthy person. Is these kind of things that you don't really think about. Um, when was there a point in your kind of
What
health
has what
journey where you kind of thought, actually, this treatment of me isn't right? These doctors are gaslighting me.
The term "they are gaslighting me," it really only came to me about a year and a half ago.
It's become a bit trendy now, gaslighting. The term gaslighting has suddenly become a thing.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I had heard the term in the way it is used as a trend, and it's usually within relationships and usually related to some forms of narcissism
Yeah.
within romantic relationships or within parental relationships and things like that as well. I've seen and heard it used. But to be honest, I couldn't really grasp the term. I'm quite a literal thinker, and I couldn't see the link between gas lighting and what was being described. I couldn't grasp it until I saw an interview with Stephen Fry,
Okay.
who explained about the film. There was a black and white film, I believe, in the 60s, might have been the 50s, but around that era. And it was set in a building that had gas lighting, literally, and the gas was managed from the attic. And it was a couple that lived there. And the man, before he left somewhere, he would go up and twiddle with the gas so that the lights were flickering. And so the lights only ever flickered when he wasn't there, when she was on her own. And so she
Yeah.
would say, there's something wrong with the gas. Well, clearly there isn't. You and I can both see it's not flickering. And so in the
Hmm.
end, she started to doubt herself and think that she must be mad. She's imagining these things.
That's so
Um,
interesting.
and once I understood that,
Mm.
I thought, that's exactly what went on. They were trying to get me to believe that I was mad. And at some point, I definitely considered it. But what I had come to before that was that I called it medical abuse. And
Okay.
it was only
And
after
you
I'd heard
do.
Stephen Fry in that interview that I thought, this is medical gaslighting. And I thought I'd come up with the term. I was really proud of myself, come up with a new term. And then I put it into Google and realized, maybe not.
You're the
So
trailblazer.
no claims to that. But I do have a claim to the Dutch translation of it, although that also came from a friend rather than from myself. But there's already a hush going around here in Belgium saying in a few years' time that term needs to be in the dictionary books, and it will be you who
Ah.
started that. So I'm really proud already.
When you
in that
discovered that term, then medical gaslighting, how did that then make you view your own conditions and the way that you were being treated by doctors?
it really helped. It really helped to be able to name it, see it for what it was, because the image of that film and the way Stephen Fry described it was so clear. It was, we will present this to you, we will say what we see. And indeed, when I turned up for appointments, I was well cared for, and I did the
Yeah.
walk and I did the talk. So, and especially for the psychological appointments and stuff like that, they didn't see what a GP could see when he had to come and give me an injection. But even then, those were momentary things.
Mm.
So they presented me with what they could see, and I was saying, yeah, but the bit that you don't see is this, this, and this. Yeah, of course. No.
Yeah.
So having that image, it just made it so clear, like, yeah, that is what was happening.
Yeah.
For many years by then, for I think about 8 years, I had a friend who'd offered her services as a psychologist. And repeatedly, she heard me do this to myself, repeatedly. Because what happens with medical gaslighting is you do start doubting yourself. You start believing the rhetoric that you're
Mm.
being spoon fed. So I would be in agony. To the point, I'll give you the most extreme example. I had a fall. My face was a mess. By then, we knew that I had adrenal insufficiency, which means that in situations of high level of stress, I need cortisol. It can be life-threatening within a short space of time. So that happened. There was a whole lot of people turned up next to me, strangers to me. What's happened? Can we help? They called an ambulance. And my internal dialogue was, they're just going to say it's nothing. Why call an ambulance for all I did
Yeah.
was fall? I mean, don't be so ridiculous. That was my internal dialogue.
Which is
And
awful because physical, like you've actually fallen over. Like that's not not making that up. You did actually fall, but the years of medical gaslighting
no,
that's happened to
I didn't
you
fall.
then makes you think that that you've made even something that
Yeah,
physical up. That's insane. And I think it's also though,
exactly.
and I'm assuming you probably go into this in your memoir as well. We're not taking anything away from doctors. I'm not painting doctors as the demon. Doctors they're
No,
good at their jobs. They know what they're doing.
no.
But like you said, when it comes to rarer illnesses, and doctors can only address the things that are in front of them. And if you've got a fluctuating condition, that's very hard for them to diagnose. So I just wanted to point out that we're not taking anything away from doctors, but that medical gaslighting is also a serious thing.
I'm definitely not taking anything away from doctors as a generalization.
I'm thinking your
But
journey has probably
yeah,
been quite a lonely one. Feeling that you're not supported by doctors and feeling that you're going crazy. I know that you've got a really supportive husband, but how have you managed to make sure that you do get the support that you need?
I keep hearing from people around, you're really good at this. I should ask for more help. I should really use your example. So there must be something I'm doing right on that score. I have to say, for all its faults, and for all the problems I could have with it ethically as well, Facebook has really been a lifeline for me and for many chronically ill people, especially in times when I was bedbound. I was bedbound for years when my little boy was really, it must have been about the age that your children are now. My 3-year-old, I have one son, we have one together, husband and I. He was 3 or 4 when he stood by my bedside. I mean, when he stood up, his head was about the height that mine was when I was lying down.
Oh,
And he whispered, Mummy, I think you're dying. I'm afraid you're dying. And he was right,
oh,
actually. It was soon after it was shown in my blood results that, the endocrinologist said, this is a terminal value. And I was like,
wow.
yeah, I knew that. You know, I was actually knocking at the pearly gates before things were discovered.
How did that
And,
get turned
that
around?
one with the discovery and with my trust in a doctor whose reputation was actually made questionable when really he was really serving what's statistically called the outliers. Because what I was saying before about some individuals I have an issue with, and that issue will remain, a lot of them it's because they believe that science has all the answers.
Mm,
Science is there to ask all the questions.
mm.
When you stop asking the questions and think we know everything already, you're on dangerous ground.
So you found this one doctor
Yeah.
that kind
I
of
found two. I found two. The one referred me to the other, and they each had different specialties. And so, because at the time, I'm pretty sure that's only theory, but I'm pretty sure my body was at the point where it was just throwing everything into that battle. I need to keep you alive. I will do what it takes. But the quality of that life was, the quality of life that I did have was that I did have a very loving husband and a child that I had dreamt of from the
oh,
moment I was born, I would
yeah.
say,
So
real
Facebook,
quality of life in terms of me actually meaning something. It was hardly anything.
but weirdly,
And
Facebook
that's,
provided you with the support that
yeah,
you felt that you needed.
yeah, through a distant family member, I discovered the joys of a mini laptop, which is what I'm on at the moment as well, but that one was even smaller. Um, I think it was even before the time that tablets existed,
Yeah.
because a proper laptop was too heavy for me to handle in the bed. Can you imagine? That's how weak I was,
Oh
having
wow.
like half sitting up like this in bed, like half sitting, half lying.
Yeah.
I couldn't handle a proper laptop. It was just too heavy.
It's crazy to think about.
So, but the mini one that worked, and then I
Yeah.
discovered Facebook, and away I went. And I had to learn. I various people influenced that learning. I had a friend who was able and willing to ask the questions that most people shy away from. Like she would say things like, how much money have you got in the bank? And can you afford to pay for this kind of help? No, I can't.
They're the kind of
I
friend you
mean,
need, I feel like.
I'd been on incapacity. And sometimes I was taken aback by her questions, but I always was able to. And that medical gaslighting had prepared me very well at being able to answer questions straight. That's your
Yeah.
question. This is my answer, kind of
Yeah.
thing. Um, But she used that information to really look at how can we help. And one of the things she did was set up a gardening team and organised that they started to sort out our garden.
Oh, that's
And
really
then I
nice.
realized that it was one thing asking for the help, it was another realizing and being able to define what that help was that we needed. But then it was another when people actually came to accept that. It's all right asking for help. That wasn't so big a thing for me. But then when they were here that first time, several people working in this garden that was a jungle. And I was lying on the settee. I'd made it downstairs. That was a major effort, but I wanted to honor theirs. I was broken emotionally. It was like, on the one hand, it was so soothing and so affirming and such a being loved experience. And on the other, it was like, yeah, but I'm not worthy. They're all crazy. They must be. So why on earth would I? And what are we ever going to do back? I'm not capable of doing anything. I'm not capable of meaning anything to anyone, you know. So
It's
that
just
was
so
a
crazy
difficult
that your
one. And then
experience has taught you to
yeah,
think like that. Like what you've been through has made you
yeah,
think like that about yourself. Like that's what's so crazy about it.
it made me crazy. I will have been a bit crazy to start off with. I'm willing to, accept that. But yeah, it really did. With my friend for years and years and years, she kept hearing me do that to myself,
Mm,
hearing me undermine myself, question myself. It's something that my husband finds very frustrating, very painful, and gets very angry about at times.
yeah.
And she kept hearing me do it as well. Eventually, she was able to get through to me that this was the result of abuse that I'd suffered from colleagues of hers previously, from doctors, from, the many professionals that I've mentioned. And then I kept struggling with, I'm doing it again. Why am I doing it? How can I get through? I need to get rid of this. How am I going to get rid of this? And eventually, three separate psychologists, that's another book in itself, each said to me, rather than expecting yourself to get over that, accept the fact that you won't. Accept that this is something that you live with and love
Mm,
yourself with it, you know.
yeah.
And that was really, really, really helpful.
Yeah. I can imagine that
Yeah.
because you spent your whole life fighting to kind of get better and find a way out and escape the life that you're in. And I guess that is a burden in itself. So if you can let that go and then
Yeah.
live with take every day as it comes and live life as it is, that just must be a much easier way to live, taken away from the fact of how poorly you are, obviously.
But people often say that to people who are chronically ill, and so they say it regularly to me, particularly people who enter my life as new people to me. They hear about, I'm writing this book, And one of the early questions is always, so you have good days and you have bad days then, do you? Like, assuming they already know the answer, but they've let me know that they understand, which is very kind. But these days, my answer is, well, actually, can I correct that? I
Yeah.
have good half hours and bad half hours. And
Oh, wow.
since I've started to see it that way, I've really been able to improve my life because for one, I don't do the I'm having a bad day, so I need to rest and actually rest the whole day so
Yeah.
that my body isn't supported in any movements or building or whatever. So I'll rest for the half hour or hour or, a relatively short space of time.
Yeah.
And then I will still feel as rotten, but I'll try something. And if it doesn't work, I'll try and make it a bit easier. And if eventually it's so easy that it can't be made any easier, then okay, maybe I do need to rest. Let's
Yeah.
have another half hour to an hour, and then we'll reevaluate.
Yeah. Yeah.
But equally, on the days that I'm doing really well, after like I'm reasonably well at the moment, we're having this conversation, I will probably feel really fired up after we've spoken. I'll feel like I can do anything you ask me to do. That's the
Uh-oh.
point where I need to get to bed and do
Yeah.
absolutely
Yeah.
nothing, because a half an hour later I'll be a mess, you
Yeah.
know.
When did you first realize, after all these years of being chronically ill, when did you first realize I need to write about this? I need to get it onto paper.
There was a second element to that that has yet to be mentioned, which is I also passed all my bad genes that we know of so far. I've managed to pass on to my son. So we saw him living through this. He didn't
Oh
only have
wow, I
to
didn't
carry the
realise.
burden of being a carer for his mother. So he
How is
did.
he?
That difficult question. He's doing very, very, very well. He's moved on to higher education. He's living in digs. He's at home at the weekends sometimes, most of the time. So yeah, he's managing well. He's very much now establishing his own journey and detaching, which is a hard one to go through, but a very healthy one.
Yeah, yeah.
And he has his own life to live, and his view. There's things that really overlap in how we see things. Like, I've asked him this question because of how I experience it. I asked him, "Do you sometimes do the what makes me deserve this in life? You know, what have I done to deserve this?" And he answered exactly this, probably even in the same words as my view on that, which is, I actually do that much more about the positives. Like, where have I deserved all these people willing to come and help? What have
Yeah.
I ever done to deserve that? And he said that, he said, I'm actually really, really happy, and I wonder what I've done to achieve that, to deserve to be so happy, rather than sit there and think, oh, where have I deserved this painful, this, that, or the other,
Aw.
Um,
And
so
that's tribute to you
that's
though.
fantastic that he has.
Yeah,
It's also a tribute to him, you know.
yeah.
It's
Is he
both.
then part of the reason why you decided to start writing about it all?
Well, originally, eh, all through his life, he has an additional condition which I'm only the carrier of, because I said bad genes for a
Mm.
reason. He's also severely visually disabled, and things associated with that. And from a young age, lots of people kept saying to me, kept raising suggestions for a book about his life or our life, or, it kept coming up. And in more recent years, more and more and more people kept saying how much they enjoyed my bits of writing. Be it, like, for example, a mail of complaint for some goods that have arrived and they weren't, there was something wrong with them. And I'll write something gentle to say there was something wrong with it. What can you do? But if I don't get the right response, I deal with it, shall we say. And then I often post it on Facebook.
Ah.
And I'd also started a blog many years ago, in the years when I was bedbound. That was a suggestion another friend made. She said, you need a project. Like, yeah,
Mm.
I'm going to do a project. I'm lying here in bed doing nothing but whinge, Yeah, I need a project. I'd done things like cross stitch and stuff like that. My hand would, I couldn't use it the day after because it was too repetitive, and everything gets inflamed if I do something that's too repetitive. Anyway, I started a blog, and I got quite a readership and quite positive reactions to that as well.
Mm.
But more and more people seem to know that I was able to write in a way that touched them. But the thing that really, really helped, two things happened more or less simultaneously. One was a chat with a friend. I have a dear friend. I'm not going to mention him, but he's internationally well known, not in the UK, but quite wide across the world. And he was my first boyfriend, and we caught each other again via Facebook, and we've reestablished a friendship in really nice and positive ways. And so just over a year ago, I had a conversation with him. We had a video chat, and in that chat, somehow he's always been really positive about who I am and how I am in life. And he's always been really concerned about my health and thought it crazy that they thought me crazy. That's always been very clear. But in this conversation, so there's that background to this conversation, that he really sees my capabilities. And he was like, but you have talents that you could turn into money, and I was
Right.
coming up with all the obstacles. And one of the things he said in that conversation was that I should be a comedian. And actually, after the conversation, I was mad enough to go and look up what do you need to do to become a comedian, and is there ways that
Amazing.
I could do that? We always laugh a lot. But I immediately found that there was no way that in my body, living as I live, that I could make that work. But it did put me on a track of thinking, not being able to work. I've been on incapacity since the year 2000. It's a long time.
Wow, that is long, yeah.
And it's been very painful for me. And I have searched for how can I solve that. And so that set me on, I really must do something about this book idea. But then I had this problem with my neck last year. In fact, again, it's been present for many, many years. We knew it would need operating at some point, but as long as I could delay that, the longer I could delay it, the better. But it suddenly became very, very acute.
Yeah.
Pain beyond description. And I found myself communicating completely differently with my doctors and nurses and therapists and stuff. And I was actually able to say to my neurosurgeon, look, my biggest fear is not the operation itself. I had the same operation, really, really in the lower back, which made it a more difficult operation because they had to slash open my tummy and move my innards about to get to the back. For the neck, it's really only the throat. They
Yeah,
do
just
that
the
with
throat.
them
Just
bad
cut the
enough.
throat.
Yeah. If you need to cut the blood and guts stories out, please do. You
Oh
might
no,
not have the audience that
more blood and
appreciates.
guts the better.
But I said to him, the operation itself is not my biggest fear. My biggest fear is both knowing that we need it. We need it because there's nothing else that helps. And then being put on your waiting list for operation. But I had that twice with my lower back. And the second time, it was months where I could not sit up. So I showed you my half sitting earlier. I couldn't even do that. I had to lie flat. So any drinks were put in my armpit with a straw, and I was drinking like that. And a plate of food
Yeah.
was put on my chest, and try and eat. And I was. Numerous people have said the amount of painkilling I was on would have put an elephant to sleep. Probably put them in a coma for goodness knows how long. I was
Yeah.
still awake in pain.
Uh,
I lost a lot
can't
of friends.
imagine.
My book deals with that as well. I lost a lot of friends in that period because they felt I wasn't paying them enough attention. I didn't remember what they'd said to me. Yeah, of course I didn't. I had other things to focus on. Um, and so I actually said to my neurosurgeon, that is what I'm frightened of. So what I would want you to do, because he was coming up with, we'll first try this and then we'll try that. And if that doesn't work, it'll be an operation. I said, look, we've known for 7 years now that this operation is coming. It may not be the right time. It might be that the things you're suggesting will help in infiltration and other therapies and things. I'm quite happy for that idea. I want to try it. If it works, thank you very much. But you put me on your operation list now, so that if it doesn't work, we can just go ahead with the operation. And he said, what if it does? What if you don't need the operation? And I said, well, you've got a long waiting list. Will you have any problem finding somebody to fill my space? Well, no, actually, I won't.
It makes so
Well,
much
there you
sense.
have it then.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he did. He heard me and he did.
Yeah.
And that was followed by me moving to a new GP, because it was a lovely man, the GP we had before, and he was very caring and, no medical gaslighting there whatsoever. But he did make a few mistakes with my back. He diagnosed hernias that weren't there. And for this thing in my neck, I'd been to see him and I said there was problems in my neck, and I asked, do we need images? Can I go see my neurosurgeon? In Belgium, you can. I could just have gone to the neurosurgeon, but when I have a good relationship with a GP, I want to respect that. So there was mistakes in how he'd handled that, and I couldn't take that. Oh, so I'd been to see him, that's right, to say about this problem with my neck, and he'd said to not to go and see the neurosurgeon. There was no need. There was no need for imaging, and I should take Valium for 4 days, which I did. But it was very much, well, at least if you take Valium, you're not bothered about what's going on with it, rather than it doing anything that actually helps. And a few days after I had stopped the 4 days of Valium, I was in hospital, admitted, and on serious pain medication. And then the operation got planned. So I felt it was time for a new GP. And again, that was extremely frightening. It's going to new doctors is petrifying for people who've been through this kind of thing, not just me. But I prepared for it. I prepared for it well, and I talked about my neck, and he jumped out of his chair and started talking about a therapy that I'd never even heard of. You haven't tried that, and if you had tried that, this wouldn't have happened, and blah blah blah. And the tears just rolled out of my eyes. I stayed calm, but I just couldn't. It just, And he saw it, and he sat down, and what is it? And I said, look, this is what I've been through in a nutshell. I had 20 years of being diagnosed wrong with chronic fatigue syndrome. I was told it was all down to me. I said, and now I'm here looking for a new GP, and you're telling me that I handled this whole thing with my neck wrong. It's not what I'm looking for. And you come up with a therapy that nobody's ever heard of. It might be the best thing, but how am I to know? And how am I supposed to deal with that after that history? And he heard me. He actually heard me. He calmed down, took the time, because by then I was way over the time that I should have been in there. And he said, okay, I'm not saying that this therapy will help you. I'm saying I have a lot of good experience with it. He said, look it up, do what you want. No, inform yourself. That's all I'm asking of you. Inform yourself. And if when you've informed yourself you want to go ahead with it, come back to me and I write a prescription. And I felt heard, and I looked it up. I asked the patients, I asked at the pain clinic, and everything I heard pointed in the direction of I should give this a try. So I did. And there were other things like that with this GP where I just had to say, this could be okay if I didn't have my history, but given my history, be careful. My quality of life is so much better than it was because of a lot of other things, but the way I'm communicating now and the way I'm dealing with having been medically gaslit over such a long period of time, and I still meet it every now and again, but now I recognize it relatively quickly, and my response is rather different now.
I guess also it's probably important for you you've been through this for a long, long time, and your experience behind this is immense. So I'm assuming that your one of your goals from publishing your book is going to be to save other people the time that you've spent on this, to save them having to go through all of this stuff, and to highlight the important factors from the beginning, so they can skip that bit basically of their journey. Why else is it important to you that you get your story down onto paper?
One of the important things in what you just said about I can save them time is what has been very, very clear, and it's come up in this conversation time and time again without being called that, is the communication, the having the vocabulary to explain why our experience is different. And now that I'm able to say to a doctor, look, I've only got 4 to 5 hours in a day, and this, you seeing me here functioning perfectly well, eats away from that time, that helps them. And there's numerous things like that, actually being able to state my case, using what I learned through the medical gaslighting, actually, in terms of techniques of communicating and stuff like that. So one of the things I really want to do is help people establish that vocabulary, not in terms of you need to say it as I do, but in terms of perhaps this can help you. If not, find what works for you, to actually tell people it's okay to find what works for you. Same with quality of life. You really don't have to go with the assumption that quality of life is what everybody here in the culture we live in expects it to be. Quality of life is what is meaningful to you on the inside. The thing I was saying about priorities, if you only have, in my case, 4 to 5 hours in a day, what is the priority? And there was a period in my life, I was still very young, and I was also at that stage, well, bedbound. I was settee bound during the day and bedbound at night. But I did, before I was capable of washing myself and dressing myself, I actually made a point of putting makeup on, because that was important for me. If I saw myself in a mirror, I looked, it cheered me up if I saw the made up face rather than one without. So that notion that search for what quality of life means for you and make that your priority, as long as it's not damaging to anyone else. I would add that. For me, that's important.
That's a really nice tip, and I think it's so easy, even for people without a chronic illness, to go online, look at all the social medias, see all the perfect lives out there and think, why am I not living like that? So I can only imagine for somebody who has quality of life where you only have like 4 or 5 hours a day of, time where you can do something, that must be a bit debilitating sometimes. But on the flip side, you have really utilized Facebook to your advantage, and I really admire your tenacity on Facebook, because a lot of people, well, firstly, there's the negative aspects of Facebook, which I think you're aware of, you've touched on earlier.
Absolutely.
But also you have done so well so far with the kind of the pre-marketing of your book. Like, you started writing your book, but at that same time you were already on Facebook and blogging and getting your name out there and being an advocate, and you're so active. You've done really, really well in that respect.
I think when I decided that that's what I'm going to do, and the fact that my very successful friend, he was at the source of this. We knew each other when we were teenagers, so I know what he did to get the career that he achieved. And he always had really strong self-belief, and he always continued, and he took the flak and just went ahead anyway, and that kind of stuff. And I thought, if he can do it, so can I. That was part of it. But what also I was very aware of was, I know nothing about writing books. Yeah, I can write a good letter. Yeah, I can write a blog piece that touches people. But that's quite different from writing a book. And I was aware of that. And so I did some research on, so what do I need to know? What do I need to do? Because I made myself accountable to myself, in that I announced to the people close to me that I wanted to write this book, but I'd done that a few times in my life, and they're like, yeah, you start. But I thought, I make myself accountable by telling my successful friend I'm going to write a book, then I need to make sure this is a success, so he can't turn back and laugh at me. We can laugh at a lot of things, but not at that. So I did a lot of research. I found Readsy, because they put budding writers in touch with people who present the kind of services that you do. But they also have free courses, and I did a few. They were so good. They talked about making yourself accountable. That was, so I made sure I made myself accountable, but also to myself by working out, how am I going to make that? I'm sure this is something I can achieve, but I'm not going to achieve it by pushing myself too hard. You remember in one of our very, very first conversations, you said, what's your time scale? And I said, I don't work well on the time pressure, so let's skip that idea. What I am good at is saying I will do an hour every day. I can use what I agreed with myself was, every weekday, one of my 4 to 5 functional hours will go into writing. And I stopped myself after that. Unless I was in real flow, I stopped myself after that hour. And my aim is to have about 500 words in that time. So it was almost, sometimes it was I have the 500 words, but I've only done half an hour, but I've got enough. I gave myself a little bit of leeway by doing that. At weekends, sometimes I was itching to write. I was like, no way. Nope, not doing it. I might just put 2 words down so that I knew what to go back to when I was going to write, but I would insist that I took that time off. So it was things like that, making myself accountable. And I learned that from that. Another thing, one of the very first exercises in one of those courses was write your vision. And I really didn't want to do that. And I thought, I was going to do this. In for a penny, in for a pound. And I wrote a vision. And actually, I'm very, very close to the things that are on there for the first year.
You might have written these down in your vision. What do you want to achieve from publishing your book?
What I would really, really love, but this, one of the issues with the neck operations is the voice. My voice is, and perhaps you can hear it going. It's tiring. Let's just assume that my voice is going to be okay, that we find ways of making my voice work, or of aids in adaptations so that I love giving talks. And there are ways of doing that these days. They can be done via webinars. I can do it from bed if need be, I would like to give. There have been periods in my life when I've functioned a bit better when I have given talks on multifarious subjects. But to actually do it about the content of the book and because not so much by writing my own book, but by becoming active on Facebook, as was one of the suggestions in this course, is you need to have people chomping at the bit to read your book, because if they don't, you're going to publish it. There's nobody going to buy it.
Exactly.
So I started doing that. But by doing that, I heard the very painful stories, and I learned the breadth and depth of the issue of medical gaslighting. And I would like to be an authority in that field, big-headed, but
it's important to know your audience, and your audience. It's important to not get sucked into that that kind of world of, I want everyone to love me, I want everyone to buy my book. Not everyone's going to buy your book. It doesn't appeal to everyone. You need to only appeal to your exact niche audience. And I think you've done really well on Facebook so far, appealing to those people.
One of the things I learned early on, and some of that was in one of those courses as well, but then I found out more about that afterwards as well, was be as specific as you can about who you want your audience to be. In which case, it needs to be a female, white female, roughly my age, who has 1 or more children, and who has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. There are a few. But the thing is, if you aim everything that you're writing or that you're putting out there to that person, all the others that have some kind of interest will flock to it anyway. But you won't be attracting the ones that just come for the show.
Yeah.
Whereas if you try and aim for everybody, you get the ones that only come for the show are going to be the majority. And when your book's out, it's just going to sit there because you haven't reached the ones that you're really talking to.
Facebook has its kind of pros and cons, but I think for writers, Facebook is actually a very, very useful platform if it's used in the right way.
One of the things that the Reedsy course also said was, it didn't specifically say Facebook, it mentioned social media, but one of the things it also said was, you may be tempted to go on multifarious platforms. And if you're au fait with all of them, do that. Nothing to stop you.
Yeah.
But if you're really only familiar with one of them, focus on that one. The rest will follow. And that's what I did. Because I could easily become au fait with a lot of other platforms if I really needed to. But it would eat away from my 4 to 5 hours, and I have to prioritize. And so I decided I'll just stick with Facebook. But I have been asking around. I would love for somebody who's passionate about that kind of thing to take that role off my shoulders. I wish I was already selling books and they were selling so well that I had some money and I could pay for someone to do that for me, but we're not there.
One day. The thing though for you is that it'd be definitely nice for somebody to take that off your hands, but it's you that is the selling point. It's you that writes the
Yeah.
funny blogs, and it's your writing voice that captures the audience. So giving that to somebody else who
Yeah.
can manage Facebook for you, it might take out the technical aspects of it, but it's still you.
But what I have been asking, because I've asked particularly among the youngsters, because having a teenager has its advantages sometimes. You get in touch with people who know things that older people like us don't. So what I've been asking is, I write the stuff, I post it on Facebook. Can you then do what needs doing to them, make memes with it, take
Yeah,
screenshots, copy and paste? I don't care how you do it, but so that my voice is spread wider. Rather than having some kind of ghostwriter who posts things in my name, I wouldn't
yeah,
I wouldn't tolerate that anyway. Just like they would
no,
never be good enough.
exactly. They could never replicate your voice. So yeah, I mean that is a plan
I know.
that can be something in the pipeline when you start selling books. Um, how are you feeling
Yeah,
currently about the prospect of strangers reading about your life story?
that I'm quite happy with. I was one of the recent, as in last couple of years, one of the exercises one of my psychologists gave me put me in touch with the young child, the youngest I can remember being alive. And already then I was what I call an emotional exhibitionist. I would tell everything I had to tell to just about anyone. I'm the kind of person that at a bus stop, a stranger will be there and they'll start telling me their whole life story because I'm so open myself, always open.
Yeah,
So that suits me fine. I have no issue with that. And what's also honesty and openness to me is a very, very important value. So people can ask me anything, I'll give them an honest answer anyway. So whether they read that from a book or they hear it on the grapevine or whatever, as long as it is genuine, I'm quite happy
yeah.
about that.
I mean, that's lucky that you're okay with it
Yeah.
because people are about to read all
Yeah.
about your life. What would you say to anyone who um, is maybe writing a memoir like yours, or has written a memoir like yours, and is having anxieties about other people reading it? What advice would you give those people?
I'd say don't do it then. No, but
Cut and run.
um, there hasn't actually been anything in what I've written where I've thought they shouldn't know that or that I've cut out. What I have been really careful about, or tried to be in as much as I can, is that what I write about other people, about my life, but there's so many other people have passed through that are mentioned, and it's very, very hard to write something like that in a way that nobody would be recognized. Somebody's going to recognize someone somewhere.
Mm,
So I write with as much respect and regard as I can about them. So
absolutely.
that's where my line is, where could this be damaging to someone else? It might be painful to someone else to realize some truths about what they have done to someone. As long as that's truthful, I have not really got much issue with that. In the early days of the medical gaslighting, when I was still 100% on board and felt like, yeah, I do have a few skeletons in my closet, I did have things happen in my childhood that needed looking at and sorting through. And I did that. And I'm fine. I'm so much older. I've worked through it. And so I could happily describe those things. But I do not like the way that would then reflect on the people involved, who I now have a really, really good, positive, loving relationship with, and the things that
Yeah,
needed to be said about that have been said. So why would I put that in a book?
yeah,
So that would be my advice. Be careful for those kind of things. But as for
okay,
yourself, be as open as you can be. It can only be
yeah.
healing.
I think it's the best way to be. I think
Because
if you're gonna embrace it, I think you need to fully embrace the whole memoir writing
yeah,
aspect and just be raw, be vulnerable, be yourself. Um, what's the
yeah.
worst that can happen?
And what happened was relatively early on, a few months into writing and having the Facebook page and everything, I got a mail from somebody. It was after I'd done, it must have been in April, I did a video about medical gaslighting and its effects and so forth. And somebody wrote me a mail saying how grateful she was that I was bringing it to light, but also that I was so open because she was too ashamed. And shame is something that, again, patients who get medically gaslit get spoon-fed shame. And we swallow it. I guzzled it up. But she was saying, I don't know if I will ever be able to even talk about it to those closest to me, but your voice will bring the story.
This is what I'm really hoping for from you, is that you really inspire people that are going through similar things to you. And I think you will easily. I think you'll inspire everyone who you reach
It's already
on social
happening.
media.
With my neck becoming an acute issue again now, I'm having an operation. Normally, if all goes to plan, on the 14th of December, I'm having the following operation. And there was so much happening and I couldn't deal with it all. And I said something vague about it on Facebook, and a friend answered, well, how can we help? And people do this often knowing that the answer is, well, there's nothing you can do anyway. Well, I don't take that. I usually, when people ask, I think, what can you do? This is what I did. And I thought, I could ask other people to write for my blog. I mean, most of the people who are following here have some connection with medical gaslighting, can say something about it. I'll ask.
Absolutely.
So that's what I did. But by asking, it has had so many ripple effects. It has made people come forward and say, yeah, I'm ready to write this. Please, can I? Yeah, I do. It's also put the message out there that it really isn't just about me. Read this other person's story. Look, another one with a completely different issue, but still having gone through it,
so important. It's so important for you as somebody going through it. It's so important for other people to read it, but it's also so important for the community that you're basically building. Like, you're building this community. Obviously, it started off as like therapy for you, and then it kind of turned into a little bit of book marketing for you as well. And now it's turned into this like community who can turn to you and turn to your blog to uplift themselves, feel inspired, feel like they're not alone in the world of chronic illness. So it's amazing what you're doing already before the book's even out. I just want to finally ask you, obviously you've mentioned to me that that your husband has the first draft of the manuscript now. He's the first person to lay eyes on it and he's reading through it. What are your next steps?
First, I have to mention, it's sheer hell having handed that over to my husband. It's not that we have the relationship in which that's perfectly safe and a good thing to do and the right thing to do, because going back to what I said about respect for other people, there is stuff in there that's been painful between us, and if he wants to veto that, he has every right to. So I think that's important. I don't expect that he will, but if he does, that has to be out there. But since I've handed it to him, that's not in there, that should be in there. Oh, look, I've focused on all this and it's got nothing to do with it. That needs to go. Oh, he's reading that tonight, because I know more or less where he's up to in the book. So I read along with him. He's upstairs reading and I know which chapters he's reading. And so I'm like 1 or 2 chapters behind. I'd rather be ahead, but, because I'm editing as I'm reading it, so I'm a lot slower. I'm behind more and more, and I'm right now, my confidence in my book is really, really low. So doing this podcast is really double because I need to look as though, I've got this sorted. This is going to be the best book you've ever seen. But that's not how I'm feeling on the inside at the moment.
But it's all part of the process, and it just really highlights how important the editing process is, and it highlights how important it is to have someone else read it, because what you said is true. Like, even when somebody else is reading it, you can kind of visualize how they're reading it from their point of view. So you've only read it from your own point of view when you read it back. But if you reread it thinking, how is he viewing this? It creates a whole other version of events and differences of how you edit it. So that the amounts of editing that you do before you submit your manuscript is so important.
I've done a couple of rounds myself, because you were saying the first draft's finished. I thought, well, yeah, it's actually the second or the third, or because I have edited quite a bit already. But for the next step, so his is, he has to do that on his own while nobody else is reading it because of the veto right. That on my Facebook page, the majority of my followers are American, so I thought it was very important to have somebody read it from an American language point of view and experience. So I've got somebody in America who also has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and who is also an occupational therapist, which is what I was in my more functional life originally. So we have a lot in common. So she would be like the ideal proofreader in those terms. What was really important to me in choosing my proofreaders was that I want people who are able to voice their feedback to me, who are not just going to say, well, that was an interesting read, thank you very much. No, I need them to tell me, well, that was boring and that I didn't need to know. But equally, they need to be the kind of people who I'm willing to hear it from, because I have a friend who would be a brilliant proofreader for me, but I'd be so defensive when she comes back to me that I just don't want to ask her. I know that that's going to be the case. So I've got one in America. Then I've got a friend in Australia. So, get another language angle. And she is more a carer. She, one of her children, for example, has she hasn't got the same conditions, but has had similar experiences. Let's keep it at that. And what I didn't know, in the middle of the night, her name had come to me, because initially I was thinking of the more obvious people, but the more obvious people said no or ignored my question. So I had to dig a bit deeper. And in the middle of the night, I suddenly thought I need to ask Beth. So I wrote her a note. And she got back to me saying, oh, yes, I would love to do this. She's an elderly lady now. She said, I used to be a proofreader for a bookshop. And on the basis of my feedback, they decided how many books to buy in, how many they would sell from a particular. Wow, that's been a godsend. So I've got her. And then I've got somebody else who's actually a therapist and for whom English is her second language, like it is for me. And I do know that there's a few people here at the Belgian end who really want to read it as soon as it's out. And if that means it's in English, it's in English. But I've also had feedback like about my blog that it's difficult to read because it's difficult English, so to speak. So I thought it was important to have somebody direct that a bit. So she's doing it as a second language. But the other thing is she's a therapist. And she's kind of aware of my journey, but not in great detail, not too close. But it'd be interesting because you were asking what would you like it to achieve, or why is it important to me? And that's another audience I would like it to reach, is therapists or people who are at the start of a career in a health or social service, so that they have an eye and an ear for those issues and they help avoid it happening in the future.
For people that are listening and are in the book writing world, basically what Anneke has formed here is what we called an ARC team, which is an advanced reader copy, an ARC. And it's a really, really poignant part of book marketing that I think often people can kind of rush at the end of the process and think, oh my God, I need to get my advanced reader copies out to people and they need to read it so that they can give me feedback and I can use their reviews. And it can often be quite a rushed part of the process. But you should basically learn from what Anneke is doing, because she has put a lot of thought into the kind of people that are going to be reviewing her book before publication. They are her target market. They are from different parts of the world. They can provide different feedback because of the kind of careers and industries that they are in. So she's really put a lot of effort into that. So that is a really, really key thing to implement into your book marketing strategy, is to form your ARC team early. I mean, you don't have to call it that. Just call it the bunch of people who are going to read your book. Do that early. And that will really, really help you, get your manuscript into a good position and a good place for when it's finally published. It will be the best version that it can be. But on the flip side, it's also a really great way to get those reviews of your book, so the reviews can be published before publication. So you will already have reviews of your book.
True.
I'm gonna wrap up there, because I don't want to strain your voice too much. I'm aware that we've been talking for quite a long time now, but thank you so much for coming on and being a guest today. Like, it's also been really interesting to see how much more. I knew you were doing a lot, but how much more you've been doing behind the scenes to really like boost your author profile before your book is published, and it's so important. So well done. I'm really hoping that we can get you back on as a second episode once the kind of publishing is either underway or as the publishing is nearly finished, and then maybe we even do a third episode of catch up after your book's been launched and see where you're at. But thank you so much. All the best with your operation next month. I'm really hoping that today's episode has been inspiring for some of you, and even if it just helps one person feel less alone in their journey with chronic illness, then for me that's a good result. I'm sure you probably agree as well.
Definitely, and thank you not just for this opportunity. I mean, this is a brilliant opportunity in terms of PR as well. Let's just be honest about that. It works in every direction, doesn't it? But also for your solid support right from the start, because you've asked really important questions that have made me think. Like, recently you asked, at what stage do you want your manuscript to be before it comes to us as publishers? And there was like no question in my mind that all the I's have got to be dotted, all the T's have got to be crossed. You know, I'm not giving you some. Whereas right at the start, when we talked about, I've only got a little bit, well, can you send me it already? And we had that conversation about, well, I could, but do know that all I'm doing is info dumping at the moment, and there's no way that's going to look like something that's ready to be read. You know, to the awareness of those layers, your support has been really valuable in that process. So
well,
thank
you're
you.
very welcome. I know that it's it can be a really lonely journey for anyone writing a book, and I think if you do start engaging with publishers and even just professionals within the book industry early on, they will ask the important questions, and they will make you think, and there's just a lot more to it than just writing a first draft and handing it over to a publisher. There's so much more to it. So I've really enjoyed like following you on your journey and helping you and supporting you along the way. So thank you very much for coming today, and we'll speak to you hopefully on the next episode.